There is a fund called the Senator's Official Personnel and Office Expense Account, SOPOEA. It appears in no law you've read line by line, and it has existed since 1986 without ever being forced to itemize a single expense to the public. Every senator gets one. Every senator spends from it. And to this day, no outside authority can see exactly where the money goes, line by line, the way you can for the House of Representatives next door. That gap is not an accident. It is the design. By the end of this, you'll understand why the chamber that writes your laws refuses to show its own receipts and why nobody can make it. Here's what it actually is, stripped of jargon. Every senator's office receives a lump sum each year to cover staff salaries, travel, mail, equipment, office supplies, the entire operation of representing a state. That part is normal. Every legislature needs an operating budget. The part that isn't normal is disclosure. The House publishes a statement of disbursements, itemized expense by expense, so you can see a staffer's plane ticket or a printer lease. The Senate publishes its version in lump categories, postage, equipment, travel as totals. Same government, same taxpayer money. Two completely different standards of exposure, sitting 50 feet apart under the same Capitol dome. Nobody voted on that gap directly. That's the part people miss. The Senate's accounting rules were never debated on the floor as a standalone bill with your senator's name attached to a yes or no. They were built quietly through internal rules, committee resolutions, and appropriations riders. Technical language buried inside must-pass funding bills, adjusted incrementally since the mid-1980s. Each adjustment was small enough that no reporter flagged it, no opponent campaigned against it, no constituent ever saw a headline that said Senate votes to keep its spending vague. It accumulated the way sediment does, layer by layer, until the structure was permanent and nobody could point to the single moment it was built. Today, control sits almost entirely inside the chamber itself. The Senate Committee on Rules and Administration sets the disclosure format. The Secretary of the Senate compiles the reports, and because of the Constitution's rulemaking clause, each chamber governs its own internal procedures, meaning the House cannot force the Senate to itemize, the President cannot order it, and no court has ever been willing to touch it. The people who decide how much you get to see are the same people being watched. Remember, no one voted for this arrangement by name, and here's where it gets specific. In a single reporting period, a senator's office can list official office expenses as one six-figure number, not which vendor, not which contractor, not which family member of a staffer got a consulting check. The House, by law, has to break that same category into individual line items you could search by keyword. Journalists trying to trace potential self-dealing, travel that looks personal, consulting fees that loop back to donors, mailing contracts awarded to firms with unclear ownership, hit a wall in the Senate that simply does not exist in the House. Watchdog groups have flagged this exact discrepancy for over a decade. Nothing has changed. The senator facing re-election and the senator under zero suspicion file the exact same vague total, and you cannot tell which is which. That is not a loophole. That is the account working as intended. And here's the part that should actually worry you: it's completely legal. There's no statute being violated, no ethics rule being dodged. The opacity isn't a workaround. It is the codified standard, which means the fix isn't prosecutorial, it's structural. It cannot be repealed the way a normal law gets repealed, because it was never one clean law to begin with. It's a patchwork of internal resolutions the Senate writes for itself, votes on for itself, in a body that would have to strip away its own cover to change it. Asking the Senate to itemize its own spending is asking 99 sitting senators to volunteer for exposure. No outside branch has standing to force the vote. No court has claimed jurisdiction over how a chamber formats its internal ledgers. The lock isn't hidden in a vault somewhere. The lock is that the only key belongs to the people the transparency would expose. Think about what that says about every other oversight mechanism you've been told exists. If the body that writes the nation's laws can quietly exempt its own bookkeeping from the scrutiny it imposes on everyone else. The House across the hall, federal contractors, private companies under SEC disclosure rules. Then transparency in Washington was never a universal principle. It was always a policy choice, applied selectively, by the very people it was meant to constrain. Every oversight you've heard cited as proof the system checks itself was designed, in part, by the entities being checked. So the question worth sitting with isn't whether the Senate will ever itemize its spending. It's how many other institutions have quietly built the same exemption for themselves, and whether you'd ever be shown the paperwork to find out.